I've spent my whole life camping in groups. I've done the Smokies, the Blue Ridge, you name it. I've probably been in a group found on Facebook, but there's a difference between being in the woods with friends and being in the woods alone. I wanted to prove I could handle the silence. I didn't realize that in the Appalachians, the silence is exactly what you should be afraid of. Sometime in August of 2025, I decided to make the leap and finally solo camp, being that I knew I was capable of doing this in a group setting. A solo one shouldn't be too difficult. So after some thinking, I decided the Great Appalachian Mountains would be the best setup. It's secluded, has tons of wildlife to see, and I just love a story that tells history. So off to West Virginia, I went. I decided to go to Point Pleasant, specifically being that I heard some folklore about the place with Mothman and some other cryptids. I'm not one to easily startle, so these things were more like kid horror stories. On the day I arrived at the trail, I grabbed all my belongings, making sure I'm good enough for a weekend trip, and started hiking to a good spot, which I eventually found a nice clearing close enough to a river, but not in view of the trail. Everything that afternoon was honestly pretty fine. I fished, cooked, ate, then set out to grab some firewood for the night. Once I settled down by the fire and started to get bored, the universe decided to change it all up. At first, I started to hear noises which are very common in the woods. You assume it's an animal just walking about, but once you get used to hearing noises, you start to pick up on the ones that are a little too familiar. From where I set up my tent was facing away from the river I fished in earlier, but I noticed I hear a splashing, which initially I brushed it off as just a deer crossing the river. But then immediately my instincts picked up on a familiar gait, one that sounded exactly like someone walking through water. So I decided if it was a person, that it might be best to go inside the tent so they aren't aware that I'm either up or sleeping, but it did put me in a vulnerable spot, and I just thought to grab my knife and firearm just in case. When I eventually gained the courage, I calmed my nerves and decided to stay put and wait until something happens. I already knew sleep was out of the picture, and I'd have to wait it out or confront the person if they came too close. After a few moments, the footsteps started to get closer. Then next thing you know, there's a flash. Scared half to death, all courage gone, I decided I wasn't going to disappear and become another person lost to the forest, so I took whatever sense I had in me to cut through the tent and make a run for it, not before shooting in the direction of the footsteps from earlier. Then I hear a yelling, not a painful yell, but more of an incoherent one, something sinister and truly terrifying, hearing it in person. Then as I made my way to where the trailhead was, I saw another flash. I wanted to see who this person was, being that this fear turned into a rage until another flash, which put the fear of not being Superman into me and made me realize living would be the best option. So after leaving everything and making my way back to the parking area, barely being able to breathe, I only see one other car with no plates and knew it was without a doubt someone with bad intentions. I jumped in the car and made a break for it, and one small thing I noticed was that before taking off fast on the main road, there was a stack of papers or cards there. Who knows what they could have been, but it definitely wasn't something nice. I thought of looking around to try and find the person, but being that I never got a glimpse of them or know if they even had license plates, there was nothing nobody could go off of. So I just decided to never go back, no matter what folklore comes from the Appalachians, just assume it might be someone who isn't as civilized as you.